No one will tell you this to your face, but you need to hear it right now. The world shows no mercy to the man who is everywhere. It only bows to the one who is rare. The easier you are to find, the easier you are to forget. The faster you answer, the faster you explain, the faster you please, the cheaper you become in the eyes of others, even if they never say it out loud. Value is not created by presence. It is created by scarcity. And if you understand this before it's too late, you will no longer be the one chasing anyone, you will be the one others chase. 1. The Law of Scarcity. Have you ever wondered why you're always the one who texts first, always the one who apologizes first, always the one who shows up on time while the other person arrives late without a single explanation? It's not because you love more, it's because you've let your own value grow cheap to the point that even you no longer notice. A diamond isn't precious because it's beautiful, it's precious because it's rare. And you, every time you show up, instantly, you're slapping a discount tag on yourself with your own hands. But there's something worth saying more clearly. Scarcity doesn't mean disappearing. A door that's always locked doesn't spark curiosity, it just makes people walk away and find another door. Real scarcity is like a door that opens only at the right moment, for the right person, and closes the instant it's no longer earned. Most of us don't have a shortage of value to give. Our problem is that we hand it out to anyone who knocks, regardless of whether they bring anything worth the exchange. And once a door opens for everyone, no one remembers it was ever a privilege. 2. Silence. There's something strange about silence that very few people ever notice. It isn't avoidance, it's a form of control. The moment you rush to fire back at a provocation, you're handing your emotional keys to the exact person who just hurt you. All they had to do was drop one line, and you jumped right on cue, exactly as they planned. Think of it this way. Every conversation is a chess match, and words are the pieces. The one who speaks first, who speaks the most, is usually the one giving away every move he has. The one who stays silent isn't sitting outside the game he's watching, waiting for the other side to expose its own weakness. The unease other people feel in the face of your silence isn't an accident. Human beings can't stand a vacuum. They'll fill it with the very thing they're trying hardest to hide. That's why the man who speaks less is so often assumed to know more. Not because he actually knows more, but because he never rushes to put the limits of his own knowledge on display for everyone to see. 3. Discipline. How many times have you started over? The book left half read. The gym membership signed up for, then abandoned. The promise to yourself you can't even remember when you broke. It's not because you lack willpower. It's because you're waiting for something that was never worth waiting, for the feeling of being ready. Here's the problem. We've completely misunderstood motivation. We think of it as the cause that makes people act, but in truth, motivation is usually just the result of action already taken. The man who exercises consistently doesn't feel excited first, and then go work out he goes, and the excitement arrives afterward, like a side bonus. If you're sitting around waiting for that feeling to show up first, you're waiting for something that can only be born from an action you haven't taken yet. This is why discipline, despite sounding harsh, is actually far gentler than living at the mercy of your emotions. The man who waits for inspiration before he acts lives in permanent uncertainty. He might get it done today, he might not tomorrow. But the man who treats action as a given, who no longer negotiates with his own feelings every single morning, has freed himself from an unnecessary inner battle. He isn't stronger than anyone else. He has simply stopped consulting his mood before doing what needs to be done. Epictetus was a slave before he became one of the most influential philosophers in Rome. He compared the forging of character to an athlete's training. No one becomes a champion just by wanting to. Men train when the body is exhausted, when no one is standing there to applaud. Anyone can start when they're fired up, but very few are still there once the excitement has died, and they are the only ones who ever make it all the way. 4. Your anger was never yours to give away. In 59 BC, in the middle of the Roman Forum, Cato's political opponents turned to violence to stop him from carrying out justice. Filth was hurled at his entourage. The crowd surged in to beat the men around him. Stones and debris flew through the air. Every other senator fled the forum. Cato alone was the last to leave, and he walked, slowly, turning back again and again to protest against the mob. No panic, no answering violence with violence. Seneca called anger a form of temporary madness. He was right, but perhaps not right enough. Anger isn't just madness, it's a gift you hand out for free to exactly the person who least deserves it. Every time you lose your temper over someone, you're giving them the one thing they wanted most, proof that they got to you. No one remembers who caused the chaos that day. People only remember who was the one man who kept his footsteps steady. 5. Proof that needs no words. A wooden table that stands solid for 20 years doesn't need the craftsman standing beside it to explain his skill. It speaks for itself, not right away, but year after year, in the fact that it never cracks, never rots, never collapses. That's the exact difference between real competence and something that merely looks like it. Fake competence needs someone standing next to it to explain, to persuade, to remind people it's even there. Real competence needs no reminding, it only needs time to reveal itself. This is why the harder a man tries to prove he's skilled through words, the more he makes the listener doubt the opposite is true, because if that competence were real, it would never have needed those words of proof in the first place. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than almost anyone. He wrote, "In the middle of an empire torn by war, plague, and conspiracies unfolding right inside his own court, stop wasting time arguing about what a good man should be, just be one." That line was never about morality in the abstract. It was a concrete test. If you have to stop and argue, to explain, to convince someone that you're worthy, you're burning the exact time you should be spending, becoming the thing you want to be recognized for. He chose action, because action, unlike words, cannot be faked across years. 6. The one thing you can never buy back. Seneca, in a letter to a friend, wrote that time is the one possession a human being truly owns, and yet the very thing they squander most carelessly. He wrote it with regret, not as dry theory, because he himself had to relearn this lesson too late to live it out fully. You are not short on time. Almost no one truly is. You're simply giving it away for free to calls that lead nowhere, to social obligations no one will even remember by next week. Saying no, without a long explanation, is not selfishness. It's how you protect the one thing that, once lost, can never be bought back. You will never regret the hours you spent on hard work. You will only regret the hours you traded away, giving up pieces of yourself to please people who never deserved it. 7. When being underestimated is a blessing. Being underestimated isn't always a bad thing. Picture two young athletes entering the same league. One is hyped up by the media before the season even starts. Every camera pointed at him, every opponent studying his game frame by frame to find a way to shut him down. The pressure arrives before the first match even kicks off one bad performance, and people are already calling him overrated. No one even bothers to say the other one's name. No opposing midfielder is told to mark him tight. No rival coach reviews old footage of his play. He's free to move, free to experiment, free to make mistakes with no one watching until the decisive moment, when no one can react in time, because no one had ever prepared for him. That's exactly what being underestimated gives you. Not comfort, but an unguarded blank space. The man who's rated highly has to carry an entire stadium's eyes, tracking his every step. The man who's dismissed only has to focus on one thing getting better, while no one bothers to look. Here's the paradox. Those who rush to prove their worth too early are usually the ones drawing the map for whoever wants to stand in their way. But the man who accepts being overlooked for a while, who doesn't chase recognition, gets to develop entirely in silence until the results speak for themselves, by which point it's already too late for anyone to guard against him. The man who's underestimated and knows how to keep his mouth shut is the only one still holding every card in his hand. 8. The one thing that never belonged to you. You cannot control what other people think of you. Never could, no matter how hard you try, but knowing that has never stopped most of us from spending an entire lifetime attempting the very thing that's impossible. You rephrase your words because you're afraid someone might misread them. You hide a part of who you are because you're afraid of being judged. You anticipate other people's reactions before they've even had a real one, and then you act according to your own guess, not according to what you actually think. That whole process is a race to control something that was never in your hands to begin with, because what other people think is decided by them, by their own mood, by the biases they carried with them long before they ever met you, not by anything you do. Musonius Rufus, the teacher who trained Epictetus, understood this in a way few men ever have to. He was exiled by the Emperor Nero to a barren island for daring to say things that displeased the imperial court. His reputation in the eyes of Rome's ruling class was already settled. There was nothing left he could do to change how they saw him. And it was precisely at the moment he lost every power to control other people's opinions that he became truly free, not free from the island, but free from ever having to worry again about what anyone thought of him. 9. Rarity cannot be performed. Cato never tried to stand out. Marcus Aurelius never wrote to be admired. Musonius Rufus never needed an island full of spectators to live by his own principles. What keeps drawing my mind back to all three of these men at once is this. None of them tried to become special. They simply refused to become ordinary in the way most of the people around them accepted. And that refusal, repeated over and over in small choices no one ever witnessed, is the very thing that made them rare, not any deliberate effort to appear mysterious. Rarity is never handed to anyone. It's accumulated, day by day, in the dark, by people who don't need an audience to keep going. 10. The Last Territory. Epictetus opened his most famous book with a single dividing line. There are things that belong to us and things that never do. Your thoughts, your choices, your reactions, those belong to you. Other people's opinions, their approval, those never belong to you, no matter how much of your life you spend trying to hold on to them. 2,000 years later, that line still holds true, and it's the axis. Everything you've just heard revolves around, from scarcity to silence, to discipline, to no longer needing anyone's approval. The man who truly masters himself doesn't need a crowd's applause to know he's headed in the right direction. You will never conquer the world, but there is one territory you can seize entirely, permanently, that no one can ever fight you for yourself. None of the 10 things you just heard demands that you change overnight. Scarcity begins with a single shake of the head instead of a nod. Silence begins with counting to 3 before you respond. Discipline begins with doing the work even when you don't feel like it. And the rarity you're chasing, the kind that makes people uneasy the moment you're gone, doesn't come from one big decision. It comes from every one of those small choices, added together, with no one ever watching. No one becomes the kind of person the world has to reckon with after a single video, and no one needs to. The only thing left to do is start, right now, with the very next choice in front of you. If even one of these 10 things made you pause, leave a line below. I read every single one. Thank you for staying with me all the way here, out of every other place you could have been instead. And if you find yourself needing to hear things like this more often, the Stoic path will be here every week.